There are a lot of different tropes, thought processes, things that are just so easily refutable that I don't like. That if you even think about it for about half a second, not even half a second, if you use your brain for just the slightest amount of time, that you can see through, that's ridiculous. And it, there's a situation that has come up that Kim Mulkey, the women's basketball coach at LSU, uh, there's going to be a big story in the Washington Post supposedly about her. Now, we don't know what's even included in the story, but over the weekend she came out and said, hey, I'm going to sue the Washington Post if they publish this article. Okay, great, whatever. And then the immediate reaction is that, and she says this in her written statement, that the potential story that we don't know that what it's about is why nobody trusts journalists and the media anymore, etc. And I think there are some reasons for why that's the case. But in other cases, it's the idea that I think is ridiculous, because it's somewhat prevalent in college football that the media or people hate successful people, or that successful people get unfairly targeted, criticized, etc. And that's why others choose to try to tear them down. And I think it's ridiculous in some situations, because if that were the case, everybody that was successful would be torn down, or everybody that was successful would get hit pieces written about them, or whatever the case may be. And you've seen it a couple of different times in college football over the course of the last couple of years. Now, if you are the person, if you're the head coach and you're defending yourself by saying, they're just trying to tear me down because I'm successful, that falls on deaf ears for me, because one, that's about as egotistical as you can be. It's like, I'm successful, I'm above reproach, and that's why they're coming after me. You know, your Dabo Sweeney's of the world. The idea that because I'm successful, case in point, this past year with the Michigan sign stealing allegations, the number of Michigan fans, or the number of Michigan media that would tell you, the reason that this is coming out now, the reason that this is all happening is because they can't stand to see Michigan on top of the college football world. Like, wait, what? You think that's why a story that a former Marine wrote a 600-page manifesto about how he would operate the program if he were the head coach, started an elaborate sign stealing operation with the help of coaches and staffers inside your program, that you then used for several years, and everybody supposedly in the Big Ten knew about it until it finally got called into question by the NCAA, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and then the Big Ten? The reason this story's coming out is because you're successful? Or is it the idea that a former Marine who wrote a 600-page manifesto about how he would operate the program if he were the head coach because he loves it so much, started an elaborate sign-stealing operation, including coaches, that he then used for a couple of years to rise to the top of the college football world? That might be why people are unfairly targeting you. I don't know. It's pretty simple. It's so ridiculous to me. The people who are successful and then get walked off the plank also have something in common. They're successful, and then they did something wrong, or something improper, or something that they shouldn't have done. Like Dabo Sweeney talks about how, Clemson fans don't appreciate what they got, blah, blah, blah. Like, bro, you set the standard, and now you're having trouble dealing with the standard that you set. And now, because you're not as successful, you're pissed off because people don't appreciate you. And the only reason that people are angry is because we're successful. No, people are angry or like make fun of you because when you talk about things like our program was built on name, image, and likeness, God's name, image, and likeness. It's like, okay, well, you don't understand how that sounds like, some cheesy youth pastor who just got his sermon triggered for that week by, drinking an ice cold Dr. Pepper. Like, I was drinking an ice cold Dr. Pepper the other day, and you know what it reminded me of? Like, that's the like crap that people don't really have a whole lot of tolerance for. And it's sort of the same thing with Kim Mulkey, where nobody writes hit pieces about Gino Auriemma. Nobody wrote hit pieces about Pat Summitt. You know why? Because they probably didn't have a whole lot of skeletons in their closet. It's the same like Ohio State. Ohio State fans, when Urban Meyer was going through his bag of crap, oh, they're trying to tear Urban Meyer down because he's successful. No, they're trying to tear Urban Meyer down because he knowingly covered up his assistant coach beating his wife. This isn't that difficult to figure out. If you're successful and then you don't do things that are wrong or improper or even could be viewed that way, the biggest hit piece about Nick Saban was that he yelled at Maria Taylor that time. And he wasn't even really yelling at Maria Taylor. He got pissed off. He was yelling at the media as a whole. It just was Maria Taylor was the one asking the question. And she immediately was like, I don't think he was yelling at me. I don't know what the hell everybody's worried about. No, hell, Bear Bryant, like they made a movie. Tom Berenger starred as Bear Bryant on an ESPN movie. There are so many people throughout the history of college sports who have been uber successful and have not had hit pieces about them or have been torn down by the mainstream media or any of that stuff. Like it's just it's so unbelievably easy to look at things objectively and be like, okay, well, so if you like in Kim Mulkey's instance, people are trying to tear me down because we're successful. Like, or the best player to ever play for you was in a Russian prison for 10 months, and you couldn't be bothered to even say, like, man, I hope she gets out soon. Not even, man, I hope she gets out soon. Somebody said, hey, I haven't seen you say anything about this. And she said, and you won't. It doesn't take, even if you're like, she's rightfully detained because she tried to take hashish oil into a country where that wasn't legal. Even if that's your stance, you can be like, yeah, that sucks. I really hate to see that for her. And yet she couldn't even do that. So the idea that, and part of being successful comes with extra scrutiny. Nobody in America is like, Target doesn't pay their employees a living wage. But you know who they do say that about? Walmart. Nobody says Burger King is making Americans fat. It's McDonald's who's making Americans fat. When you get to the mountaintop, there is increased scrutiny, justifiable or not. Whether that's fair or not is a different discussion, but it is the reality. When you get to the top, there is bullshit there that you have to deal with that you didn't have to deal with before. Fair, unfair, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's the reality of the situation. So if that's one of the trade-offs of having to deal with being a championship caliber coach, sport, program, whatever the case may be, like you're just going to have to deal with that. But it's just so prevalent. It's unbelievably prevalent. One, the people who are successful that don't have hit pieces or whatever you want to call them written about them don't have to worry about that because you didn't do something wrong. You didn't do something that you shouldn't have done, or you can't be questioned morally or your character. It's always the people that have done something wrong that feel like they are above reproach and go to this stupid trope that people are trying to tear me down because they can't stand the idea of me being successful. Nobody gives a damn about whether or not you're successful or not. When you are successful and you do things that make you go like, well, wait a second, is that kind of shady, slimy, sleazy, ridiculous, beneath somewhat of that level? If you have to ask those questions, that's a whole different discussion, a whole different ball game. But just the idea, like Roy Williams, what's the North Carolina men's basketball coach who retired a couple of years ago? Won some national championships. You know what the hit pieces are on him? He's a nice guy, treated me really well. Dean Smith, who was the North Carolina basketball coach, great guy, treated everybody with utmost respect. Everybody's got great stories to tell about him. Insanely successful. You know why there aren't hit pieces about him? Because you didn't do things improper. You didn't do things wrong. There are so many people who have been to the heights of their professions, whether it's sports, politics, lawyers, whatever the case may be, that people have really nice, good things to say about. Like the idea that because it's college sports, therefore, nobody can stand to see me be successful is so unbelievably dumb, because we only tell the stories of those people who are successful. You're not writing stories about whether Rice's football coach acted properly, improperly. There's no scrutiny there because you're not successful. Like when an unsuccessful coach gets fired, it's just, hey, this guy got fired after 4 years. He had a 8-25 record during his tenure, blah, 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 blah. There's no investigation. There's no increased scrutiny. There's no hyper focus on whether or not you did something right or wrong. So being successful is both a blessing and a curse. It comes with some downsides. But the idea that we just immediately tear down anybody who reaches any modicum of success is so unbelievably dumb that we can work past this. All you got to do is turn your brain on for about half a second. Because if that were true, if the idea that somebody is trying to tear you down because you got to the top were true, then everybody would get torn down. And you know what doesn't happen? That. That'll do it for today's episode of Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you are listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and make sure you're getting all the great college football content that we are pumping out. I'll see you tomorrow here on the Daily Huddle with Saturday Glory.